Hello, everyone. I am really excited to have Dr. Erica Matluck with us. She studies and practices so many of our favorite things. She's a naturopathic doctor, nurse practitioner, Reiki Master, massage therapist, yogi. I'm sure I've probably forgot something too, but we're so excited to have you on the show today, Erica.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
And we love to start off our show just by asking the question, when is the first time that you ever felt connected to something spiritually or felt something on a soul level?
For me, it was very early. So much of this journey for me started when I was 11 and we lost my mother to lung cancer. And I think I was a sensitive kid before that. Like I really felt a lot of things. And as I think a lot of us experienced as kids, we were sensitive and no one really taught us how to use that. I remember in the time when my mother was ill, going to the hospital and like really feeling like I didn't have this language then, but I felt that it wasn't a healing experience. It wasn't a place where you could relax. It was like a place that really made me contract. And when she passed and I was 11, I felt this deep knowing that at that time I would have used the language, I will see her again. But I think what really I was feeling is that my mother changed form. She passed on to the other side, and I still felt very connected to her. And it really sort of opened up for me this doorway to having a relationship with the unseen world or the unmanifest or things that are really can't be seen or touched or perceived in this reality. And that for me was like a really big beginning and a really important part of my path.
Yeah, and I know that seeing your mother work through that illness was a catalyst for where you're at today. And I think there's part of your story too, where maybe you saw an alternative route of what healing could look like. Would you mind sharing a little bit of that story and how that contributed to the methods that you use today?
Yeah. So it started later. I wasn't exposed to an alternate route until years later when my first love, my first boyfriend in high school, his father was diagnosed with a different kind of cancer, but also given a terminal diagnosis. And he ended up going down to Mexico to one of these alternative clinics and doing IV nutrient therapy and a macrobiotic diet and dramatically changing his lifestyle and going into remission. And I'm no longer in touch with that old boyfriend, but to my knowledge, his father had long outlived the prognosis. And that was a real big seed for me of like, oh, wow, there are actually a lot of different ways to heal. And I want to know what they are because what I've been exposed to is definitely not the way that I want to go with my own body, and probably not the way for a lot of people out there. So it sort of set the tone for me to start exploring what are other ways to heal, how do people in the world heal, and what feels right for me as an individual.
Yeah, and it seems like you didn't lose hope with maybe the allopathic system because I know you trained in that as a nurse practitioner. So, what was the, I guess, intention or the inspiration for? Did you do that first or did that come later?
It actually came later. So I started the journey. I started as a Reiki master and then a massage therapist. I was doing a lot with energy and with manual therapy and body work. And I always knew I would go deeper than that. But really what the springboard to go deeper was the fact that I didn't like that my clients had to keep coming to me. They weren't really empowered to heal themselves. So then I set out for the doctorate of naturopathic medicine, and I started that journey in a dual track program to be a naturopathic doctor and a midwife. And then throughout that journey, I realized that as much as I'm super passionate about home birth and women having empowered birthing experiences, being a midwife was actually not the path for me. And because of that, because I changed my track, I ended up having a summer off. And just the way that the scheduling of the ND program is, I ended up having this free quarter. And I went down to Nicaragua and I did a bunch of volunteer medical work. And I had never really thought about nursing originally. I don't know why. I grew up in like a really sort of academic setting where I excelled in academia, and it was sort of like, I'm going to be a doctor. What kind of doctors are there? And I just hadn't had a lot of exposure to what nursing was about. But when I was in Nicaragua, my greatest experiences were working with the nurses. And I realized that the philosophy of the nursing profession was really similar, if not identical, to the philosophy of the naturopathic profession. Now, in practice, it doesn't always look that way, but at the core, they really do share the same values. And so when I returned to the States, I decided to do a master's in nursing, mostly to have a little bit more mobility as a healthcare provider. Naturopathic doctors are not licensed in every state. It's certainly not recognized internationally. So I did the nursing program to open up some doors. And in doing so, I also discovered that as a naturopathic doctor, we tend to select for a certain type of patient, typically someone who either doesn't jive with the conventional approach or had a bad experience with it. And it was actually a really important part of my sort of journey to being a holistic provider, to actually work with people that the conventional route works for. So I started my naturopathic doctorate, and then in my 4th of 5 years of the program, I started a master's program in nursing at the same time.
Wow. So how did you fuse those two together in your practice?
So I started my career then post graduation. I started at a very innovative primary care practice where I worked with conventional doctors, nurse practitioners, osteopathic doctors, physician's assistants, and I operated as sort of a subspecialist in the general practice where they referred to me typically patients who just didn't do well with the conventional approach. So I saw a lot of chronic fatigue and digestive issues, hormonal imbalances, fibromyalgia, Lyme, and mental health issues. And I got to like really sort of bring the lifestyle, the nutraceutical perspective, and a little bit more of like an integrative perspective to a conventional setting. I still would not call that holistic. I still felt limited in what skills and what parts of my perspective were really welcome in the environment. But I was able to really, really bridge and blend the, what I knew as a nurse practitioner and what I knew as a naturopathic doctor, and those like different and overlapping skill sets.
Yeah, that's so awesome because I feel like we always talk about this. The future really is how Eastern and Western medicine can be infused together and really meeting people where they're at. Because it's like you said, you get a certain type of clientele that goes to naturopath doctors, and it's like, where can we meet in the middle so that anyone who is experiencing these chronic conditions or autoimmune diseases can also get the same type of recognition? So that's really beautiful. How did you start to come into your own practice? What was that transition like?
Yeah, it was scary. I think every one of us who makes that leap from, the stable paycheck and the benefits and everything into doing something that's like really an expression of ourselves, it's scary, and it was a big part of my becoming where I am today. Um, for me, it was always a question of when I was in the conventional setting, I always knew I was compromising certain aspects of like who I was as a practitioner and as a healer. And I checked in with myself often to make sure that it still felt balanced. Like I was still developing, I was still gaining, I was still learning, and I still felt like I was doing work that was integrous with who I am. And I stuck with that until I hit a point where it was like, okay, now I'm actually not expressing aspects of who I am, and they need to be expressed. And that was sort of when it was time to leave. A few things happened in my life all around the same time. One of the things I ended up doing in that conventional practice was launching a group visits department or service. So I started working a lot with the dynamic of patients in groups and really focusing on empowering people with tools to change their lives. We did a lot of work with mental health and bringing in breath work and meditation into the conventional setting, which was really cool. And I felt very innovative at the time. And so that led me then to, wow, I really want to continue working with groups, but I really need to get out of this, like this setting, this building. If I'm really thinking holistically, I really need the elements of nature. And so around the same time, I fell in love with my now partner, and he had had some experience leading retreats. And we decided to collaborate on a retreat. And that was that was the fall of 2017. And we did our first retreat together in Tulum, and it was sort of like a proof of concept retreat where we brought people on this journey through the themes of the chakras. And in that experience, I was like, I have to be doing this. You know, like it was so aligned and so right. And everything I wanted to feel as a practitioner and as a human, that we got back from that trip, and I gave the notice at my conventional job and set out to start my own thing.
I love that. And I think something that we love and that we notice with anyone who's really on the holistic path is that we all feel inspired to empower others. So rather than being the person who has the right answer, we want other people to know that the right answer is within them. And it's just something that it's so important. And essentially what it's doing is teaching people how to manifest, right? So instead of just putting the Band-Aid on the symptom, it's like, how can you not only solve what's actually going on here, but then use that as knowledge and awareness to create the life that you actually dream of living. So I'd love for you to just define for us what manifestation is and how it plays into all of this.
Yeah, I like the way that you spoke about it. And I'll also add, I think that language plays a really important role. And sometimes, depending on who I'm talking to, I will choose different language, right? Because in the spirit of manifestation, if we're talking about how we create our reality, the throat chakra is one of the most important centers. And the language that we use, the vibrations that we create through sound, actually have an impact. So for me, when I think about manifestation, to me, that, like, I define it as creation, as creativity. And if we were just looking at the word, manifest, I would equate it with creating. But a lot of the times when we're talking about manifestation, we're talking about not just creating, but creating with awareness, right? So it's like this knowing that every thought I have, every statement I make is having an impact on reality, and it's creating something. Sometimes it's immediate, sometimes it takes years, sometimes another generation to actually come into reality. And sometimes I'm not even aware of the ways in which my thoughts and language are coming to be. But so a manifestation practice, in the context, I think that people like you and I are interested in, is really about bringing awareness to that and doing it at will. So this is what I want to create. Are my thoughts, is my language really congruent with that? Is the way that I'm carrying myself, is the emotional field that I'm creating and what I'm attracting in, is that really in resonance with what it is that I want to create? And so I think sometimes, there are some people that I work with where the term manifestation or a manifestation practice doesn't really resonate. And then I say, okay, what about creativity? What if we talk about your ability to create at will? Does that resonate? And if so, it's the same thing.
Definitely. And I mean, manifestation now is such a buzzword, and it's so interesting because things like the Vedic knowledge has been around for 5 and thousands of years. It's the oldest sciences that we have. So I always think, and my teacher taught me this too, it's like anytime you have a new trend, like just know that the Vedas always did it in their own form. And this is something we realize we were always immediately drawn to the chakras. The first time I learned it was just like, that makes sense. That's how I see the world from now on, is through this lens. It makes so much sense. So and why we actually really resonated with a lot of your work was because you spoke of the chakras in a very similar way. It seemed like we saw eye to eye on that. And I love how you've been bringing manifestation into the chakras. So I just would love to hear, and I know you kind of only just sprinkled that in, but how can you manifest through the chakras?
Yeah, so I agree with you. I really like using the chakras as a framework. I think that archetype is a really powerful way to understand the self. And totally agree with you. None of this is new. But sometimes the application of things in the current culture and the present moment feels new. So I like using the chakras because as archetypes, they give us sort of like 7 different perspectives of self, 7 different perspectives of reality, which I feel like is a pretty digestible number. And when we work with energy in the chakra system, you start to understand or feel how energy moves. And we human beings are like batteries. We have positive and negative poles. We project and we receive. We are magnets. And we can both create by putting things out there. We can also create by attracting things in. And so using the chakras to manifest is really about understanding the unique dynamics of each one. And I'm about to launch an 8-week course on this. So obviously I have a lot more to say than we have time for in this discussion, but I break it down in a number of different ways. And one way that I want to share about is manifesting from the upper chakras, which is like up here, this perspective of self. We are one with the creator up here, throat, third eye, crown. And up here, we create at will. Down in the lower 3 chakras, that's where the separate self lives. We're not in unity conscious there. We're in the illusion of I am a separate being from you or from the earth or from the celestial world. And down there, it's very easy to feel like a victim of circumstance. So one of the things I really like to share is that it's really important to do the healing work of the lower chakras. This is where a lot of our old wounding lives. A lot of our, feelings of being a victim or old heartbreaks and pain. A lot of that work it's dense and it's heavy and it's in the lower chakras. Now, when I see people trying to use their powers of manifestation, powers of the upper chakras, just to create material wealth and yachts and mansions, to me, that's a sign that the work in the lower chakras hasn't been done, right? The healing work. Because once we've done that healing work down in the lower 3, then we cross the bridge at the heart. And then all of a sudden, we don't want to create just for, personal or individual gain. We want to create for all beings everywhere. And one of you said it, really beautifully early on, where sort of like you made a reference to, we start our journeys in our own path and our own healing, and then we get to a place where when we want to share it with others. And to me, the heart is that distinction, it's that bridge. So how do we manifest from the chakras? Back to your original question. We understand the dynamics of how each one works, and we understand where we are. We then take note of like, am I in the shadow of this? Am I am I creating from a wound? If I'm creating from a wound, let's pause and actually work on healing the wound. Because quite frankly, what you want to create once you've healed the wound is going to be different from what you want to create when you're in the wound. I love this saying, hurt people, and healed people, heal people. Not that any of us is ever completely healed, but that's a really important concept when we're creating from the chakras. So first, there's like this check-in of, am I actually ready to create? And if the answer is yes, then to me, the art and the science is like knowing which one you want to create from, right? So like if I want to create something in the material world, the root chakra is an important place for me to understand. If I want to create something for in terms of ancestral healing or for future generations, for my son's future, I want to come up to the third eye, where like the perspective is much grander beyond time and space. And so for me, it's really about really understanding each chakra and how each one is like, the mechanics are different from the others, and having the awareness to know where I'm creating from, to create a practice that's like really reliable and successful and fulfilling. And, sometimes that means you get to a place where you're like, oh, actually, I'm not ready to create yet. Let me go back. Let me go down below and look at what's going on here. And usually I say this is sort of like a blanket statement, but to really manifest through the chakras in a reliable and successful way, you have to be engaging at least 4. And probably one of those 4 needs to be the third eye or the throat. And probably in most cases, one of those 4 needs to be the solar plexus, because that's where all our blocks are. It's really, really hard to create something if you don't believe it's possible. And for the large majority of people that I work with, that's what we're working through, is that like those limiting beliefs of the solar plexus of like, how can I create? I can't be a billionaire. Like that's not even possible. So yeah, so 4 chakras. One of the 4 is the throat or the third eye. One of the 4 is the solar plexus. And then the other 2, I think, can be sort of multiple choice. Choose which ones work.
Yeah. And I think we see this too, where the upper chakras sometimes are sexy, right? It's like, oh, let's have visions and daydream. And, the least sexy work is maybe in the body and getting back into the body after you've discovered spirituality, because you want to be flying around the ethers. So definitely relate to that personally as well. And I'm curious if you in your journey have really worked with one, and, obviously it's a system and you work with all of them, but has there been one more recently that you've been drawn to, or one that you've really felt you've had blocked in your life that you've done a lot of work around?
Yes. I mean, I've definitely worked with them all, and I'd say there's, it's probably not accurate to say I've worked more with one than another, but it's accurate to say that I've encountered more challenge in the sacral chakra than in some of the other places that I've. And for me, I love the question, and it's nice for me to reflect on that now because I'm in a very, very happy, loving partnership, and we just had our first child 9 months ago. So it's a nice like reflection question for me to be like, wow, look how much I worked through. But I was like the queen of 3-month relationships, serial dater, disappointed love over and over and over. And as a single woman stuck in a pattern of relationship after relationship, I didn't think I was going for the same type every time. He looked different, but I was left with that same feeling of feeling disappointed or feeling rejected or grieving like the relationship not working out. And I really sort of had to pull back and work through sitting with the discomfort of being alone and moving from a state of loneliness and longing to a state of like sovereign aloneness that allowed me to finally like attract in what it was that I really wanted. And it was shortly after I took myself off the dating market and said, I'm doing a relationship with myself, and I'm really focusing on self-love and what it means to just like find peace in my aloneness. And it was not very long after that my now partner, who I had known previously and not been attracted to at all in a romantic way, mysteriously reappeared in my life, and we were like two different people meeting.
Feels very fitting that you're sharing this because we're recording on Valentine's Day. So love and the sacral are, very, very big right now. And I'm curious if you'd say that sacral is a big one for a lot of people that you work with. I know you mentioned the solar plexus is a big one where blocks are, but as far as where most people are working with currently, what are you sensing?
Yeah, I was thinking about this. I think it's a mix between, I think almost everyone alive today has work in the root, the sacral, and the solar plexus. I think in my practice, I see the most amount of suffering coming from the root. The root, in a lot of ways, this is the original wound. It's like, it's so funny because I'm going through this as a parent right now, and being conscious of this with my son is really interesting. It's like, I don't want to sleep train him, because I don't want to create that original wound of feeling separate. And I feel like a lot of us in our early years, we sort of like went through this tug of war between secure attachment and like really expressing ourselves authentically. And we learned in a very sort of unconscious way from our parents' energetic and emotional responses to express ourselves in the ways that we perceived as loved and accepted, and sort of repress the aspects of ourselves that weren't met with love and acceptance. So this root chakra work is really about trusting that you are safe to be yourself completely. And we are conditioned over and over and over again in so many ways to believe that we are not safe if we show up as the people we truly are. And so we have this whole world of people that are pretending to be people that they're not. And it's not really serving any of us. But that, I think, is like the thing that causes more suffering than the other chakras. But I think culturally, the sacral and the solar plexus are are more pervasive culturally in the collective. I mean, all marketing is sacral, right? It's like feeding those desires and those longings and the pain, the people pleasing. And then the solar plexus work, it's like, I mean, we live in an age of perfectionism, you know, everyone is trying to be perfect. No one and nothing is ever enough. And our beliefs are really, really sort of like curating the reality in which we exist. We've seen that a lot through the pandemic. I think the pandemic has really inflamed the sacral and the solar plexus wounds. So it's, you know, a little bit of all three of those.
Yeah, we definitely agree. It's like the lower three chakras, that's where all that density of the emotions, and we often always begin with the root. At least we've been seeing that across the board, because we see the limiting belief behind that is fear. And especially within these past couple of years, there's been such a purging of fear, like wanting us to overcome that, I think, as a culture. Like that's what we saw the opportunity with COVID times. And we could see how the lack of structure and trust is all kind of moving pieces around, and the systems are. And yeah, it's interesting that you bring up parenting too, because I think that's such a thing of how can I bring up my child to trust their body's intuition, that to trust their signs that they're getting, so that that can lead them into their own alignment to create their own structure how they see fit, not based on societal conditioning and what their system is that they put us on. So I love that. I totally agree. And it's interesting too that you brought up the solar plexus as always having to work with that with manifestation, because we oftentimes we work with a lot of healers and we converse with a lot of healers in this space, and I think that that is the one that is the most out of balance for them. And because it's almost like the self-doubt that you were describing earlier of like, who am I to be sharing these gifts, who am I to be in any type of position where I know more than the other person, and things like that. And that often like stunts their growth. But again, there's always an opportunity to all of this, that's just getting them forward to be the next level of holistic healing that we'll have for, yeah, everyone can start using these modalities again. Everyone can start healing in holistic ways. And we actually need you to be confident in your gifts and to share them, because that is the way that the world's going to heal and evolve. And I'd love just to go deeper into the psychology behind these chakras, because like you said, it's important to do the shadow work in order to be able to manifest out of them. And again, this is something that we loved your work for, because we totally agree on that same level of the psychology behind each one. So I'd love to hear, how did you first start to almost channel those insights and connecting those two together of limiting beliefs and chakras?
Well, it's been a process for me. You know, one of the really cool things about working in a conventional medical setting for a decade is that, I mean, this is a blessing and a curse of the conventional medical setting. I saw so many people. And so I had a background in, I mean, I first really started diving deep into the chakras when I was 18, 19 years old. Did a Reiki Master training with a woman who did a lot of work with chakras. So I had this, like, a lot of ideas in my head about them. And then when I was working in medicine, I sort of got to test some theories by seeing a lot of different people and looking at themes and, you know, what was going on both energetically and then actually physically. So I started drawing some correlations. That was like the first step. And then as I started working with people on retreat and working actually more directly with the chakras, more and more started coming out. And it's still like, I could just focus on these 7 energy centers for the rest of my life, easy. Every time I do a course, every time I lead a retreat, every time I work with a new client, new insights come out. It's like they're opening for me at just the right time. And, you know, and that, like, to some degree, that's that's my medicine. Like each one of us who works with any sort of modalities, it's like we're drawn to the things we're drawn to for a reason. And the people who are drawn to us are drawn to us for a reason. So I don't necessarily believe that, like, you know, the way that I use the chakras or I see them is like applicable to everyone everywhere. I just like it works for me in a way to sort of understand the holistic self. By the holistic self, I mean the physical, the mental, the emotional, and the spiritual. And it helps me to sort of bridge the seen and perceived reality with the unseen and the imperceivable. And it helps me to be able to explain it to people in a way that's digestible. So my partner and I have done 7 retreats where we focus on the chakras. And each one, it's like the divine timing of things. It's so magical. We considered the first retreat we did our root chakra as you know, a retreat company. And all these new insights about the root opened up for us. Our second retreat was for us, even though we go through all 7 in each one, for us, it was our sacral as a business. And all these new insights and ideas opened up about the sacral. And that's now happened through each one. So it's new things are just opening. And so our next retreat will be our second go through the system. So I'm really excited now to see what happens. And it interestingly correlates with our journey as new parents, which again, I'm now going through each one from this perspective of how do I look at this as a mother and in my developing child.
Very cool. Yeah, there's so many connections that we can constantly make with the system. That's why it's so cool to see life through this lens. And even after, you know, even though Reiki, the ancient system, didn't have the chakras, but now that we have this mix between all the Vedas and we can understand how Reiki works with the chakra system. It's interesting, even after you go through that training, you can go through a chakra cleanse where the Reiki energy is working to clear out each of those energy centers. So that's really cool that happened with your retreat experience on like all those different levels. I'm curious because I saw that you work with the Kundalini energy. How does Kundalini energy work with the chakra system?
Well, I'll say a lot of people would have different answers to this. You know, we could look at the actual basics of what Kundalini is and a Kundalini rising or a Kundalini awakening, and how that is this like dormant seed of energy that is then awakened and rises through the spine. And we could dive deep in a lot of different ways with that. But in speaking practically, for me, the way that I work with both is that the chakras sort of provide the framework for me. And Kundalini Yoga provides practices and tools to actually target where there are, let's say, deficiencies or imbalances or excess. And it allows me to give people tools that they can use themselves. I'm really not here in my work to convince anyone of anything. I'm here to give you ways and tools to try things on and for you to have an experience. So then you can draw a conclusion. Either this works for me, this doesn't work for me, this is what I experienced, this is where I felt this. And so Kundalini Yoga as a whole, it's a technology. It's an incredible technology. And so I've loved, my yoga journey, I started with Hatha and Vinyasa, and I came to Kundalini much later in my practice. And I love Kriyas. I love the idea of a Kriya. And I love the idea of using Kundalini as a practice to tone the nervous system and understand the relationship between the nervous system and the endocrine system, and how energy, or the unseen phenomenon, becomes the physical body. So so I think there are different ways that we can talk about the relationship between Kundalini and the chakras, but practically speaking, that's how it looks in my practice and my work, is that I bring in a lot of Kriyas, a lot of Kundalini meditations, to give people tools to work with a certain set of themes.
Yeah, definitely. That's what we loved about the Kundalini energy as well. It just gives you a gateway and a system so that you can work in a specific way with the chakras, which is pretty awesome. It's almost, even though it is such an unseen world, it's like a very tangible way to be working with the chakra system, which we find so empowering, that everyone has their unique experiences with them. And it's empowering because then you're able to actually feel that shift directly after a practice, and it can happen so quickly. That's how powerful the Kriyas are, and the breath work, and using your body as a system.
I also think it's important to keep in mind that a Kundalini awakening or a Kundalini rising, when we are not ready for it, can actually be a very traumatic and scary experience. And so it goes back to this same idea of, we really need to do the foundational work. We need to really develop the awareness and do the healing work in the lower chakras to be able to bring our energy up into the upper chakras, or else it's sort of like, I like this analogy of putting in a industrial strength light bulb into a light fixture in your home, and then turning on the switch. I did this once. It would cost a lot of money then to have my whole ceiling repaired, right? And that's often what a forced or an unexpected or a Kundalini awakening without doing some preparatory work can feel like to the human. So that's another way of just sort of bridging the two ideas, or the two systems, is to remember that yes, slow and steady wins the race. And if we're going to sort of bring our energy up into the crown, and we're going to awaken that life force like a rocket ship, let's make sure we know how to hold it.
Yeah. And even speaking outside of the Kundalini rising or awakening, just anything in our life, because I think sometimes even if we were to manifest every single thing that we want immediately overnight, our systems literally would not be able to handle it. And so it's super related to manifestations with the chakras, where you need this strong foundation before you can call in all of these things. Otherwise, when you get them, you get the sense of overload and overwhelm, and they will go as quickly as they came, right? And so in that same vein, I'd love to hear from you. I know you said you have a course coming up soon. Will you talk more about it, and also where people can find you? And we love your Instagram, so where people can find you there and just learn more from you.
Yes, absolutely. And you know what you just said, I like manifestation it's really about creating at will, and that this is what the course is about. The course is about understanding. So I've done a lot of courses about the chakras. We talk about the shadows and the gifts, and how to sort of understand the themes and integrate them into your life. But this course is specifically about creating and about manifesting and understanding the different dynamics, so we can be aware of where we're creating from. And, so obviously in that journey, we're going to go through each one. We're going to talk about what is the difference between creating from a sort of projective standpoint, like I'm putting it out there and creating the world, versus a magnetic standpoint, like I'm drawing into me, right? And the sacral is a great example of a chakra where we attract in through the emotional field. whereas the solar plexus, we often project from. So really sort of getting into the details of these different dynamics. And you said earlier about when you posed this question, I forget exactly what you said, but what I wanted to relate it to is sometimes we are creating all the things we want and we're not even perceiving it. We're not even aware of it, right? So like we can create from here and everything we want is happening, but we're not even experiencing it, right? Like I worked with a client once who she really wanted to create a scenario where she was writing a book in an office that was facing the water. She had this idea that this meant she was like had a book deal and an oceanfront house. That's what like the image was. And in our work, one day she woke up and she just started laughing because she realized she was doing a writing project and her office was overlooking the San Francisco Bay. She actually already created the thing that she wanted to create. She just like had a different vision of what it was. Now, if she wanted an oceanfront house and all that stuff, we could then go and do that. But this like bringing awareness to all of the things that we want where they already exist in our lives is so important. We can pray for the things we want, we can create the things we want, but if we don't experience them when they're here, that's a big part of the problem. So I work with a lot of people that are great manifestors. They're doing it all the time, very successfully, but then they're not like actually enjoying the fruits of their labor. They're not acknowledging it. And in some cases, I work with people who are like, I know how to create things, but I don't really know what I want. And sometimes that means we really got to get into that root and come back to the question of who am I? What is my essence? Because it's through that we find what we really want. So this new course, we're going to go through all 7. It's an 8-week course, so that gives us a little extra time to talk sort of from a general perspective and to workshop a little bit the things that those in the course want to create. So that's going to be coming up in March. We're going to start the day after spring equinox, the perfect time to plant seeds. And I'm really excited about it because I love working with people on creating. And, one of you said it earlier, and I wanted to come back to it, that like manifestation or creating and healing, it's all the same thing, right? Because whether I want to create a healthy body, an experience in my body that's free of autoimmune disease or a digestive system that's working well, or I want to create, a new business or a new home. It's all sort of, it can all be done through the same techniques, through the same sort of art and science. So I like to merge those ideas, whether it's healing you seek or creativity or manifestation. It's all welcome because it's all the same process. And that's what we're going through in that course.
I love that. And no matter what you're seeking, it's kind of all the same at that fundamental level, right? If you want the house on the ocean or whatever it is, it's like that freedom, that sense of joy. If you want healing, it's like that safety in your body. And all of those things really come back to just how we want to feel and how we want to be creators and live in this life. So I love what you said about that. And I don't think you said it, so I'll say it for you. I think your IT handle is experience 7 senses. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay, beautiful. I just want everyone to know because your images are gorgeous. But thank you so much, Erica, for coming on the show today. It's just been such a good talk and conversation about one of our favorite topics. So we appreciate you being here, and everyone, we will see you next week on thanks everyone.